Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is James Kanishi with My Italian Family, and I'm the director of our Dual Citizenship Services, so I'm going to conduct the session today. We have a short presentation here with some slides just to go over the general rules, and it probably will answer a lot of your questions, and then we'll take the bulk of the time to try to answer your questions directly. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so probably all of you are very interested in Italian dual citizenship, so I may not have to say much about some of the objectives or the benefits, but just to make a quick review, there's a lot of people that want to work in the EU, and the one way to do that more easily than going there and trying to get a work permit is to become a citizen of the EU, and you can do that through becoming a citizen of Italy. So it provides work opportunities much easier than attempting to get a work permit, for instance. Also, many people that have children, they want to provide the opportunity for their education in Italy or elsewhere in the EU. That's a motivating factor for a lot of families as well. There are individuals who are near retirement or just want to retire there and live some of their time in Italy or maybe full time. And of course, to be able to stay longer than 90 days with your U.S. Passport that allows the 90 days of a visa waiver program, of course, you have to become a citizen so that you can stay there as long as you like. And there's many other reasons, some just for nostalgia purposes to connect with the family, and they want to bring themselves back to Italy. So a lot of good reasons that people do it, and it's hard to say there's any real downside to it. Qualification requirements we're going to cover, and we're also going to answer all your questions as I mentioned. So let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about the qualifications, because many of you that sent in questions ahead of time and are going to ask questions tonight have a lot to do with how do I qualify? What does it mean to qualify? So let's talk about this, and this looks like a crazy chart, but let me tell you, these are only 4 different ways to go, and there are something like 14 different ways you might qualify through blood relationship, as it's called. And so here's how it works. What you want to do is determine who is the last, maybe the only, Italian citizen in your family that came to America. When was the last immigrant? Who was that? Maybe it was your grandfather, your great-grandfather, maybe your grandmother, maybe your mother or father. So you determine who came from Italy and came to the U.S. And then there's just a very simple rule. That person coming to America and settling here, becoming a permanent resident, if they became a U.S. citizen, it has to be after the birth of the next child in your lineage. So let me give you the example. If you are using your grandfather who was born in Italy and comes here to the U.S., if he remained only an Italian citizen up to the day, let's say your father was born, if you're using your father and your grandfather, and so your father was theoretically born of an Italian citizen, even though your father was born here in the U.S. as a U.S. citizen, he really inherited the rights from his Italian father. As long as that's the case, then you would qualify. But there are a lot of families where the immigrants came over, they didn't maybe have children right away, they went through the process and became U.S. citizens, and maybe then they began to have children. Or in some cases they had some children, then they became a U.S. citizen, and then children after that. Well, all the children born after the date of that immigrant, when they became a U.S. citizen, then you're out of luck, because now the child was only born of a U.S. citizen. Because when you take the U.S. oath, up until 1992, when an Italian immigrant took the U.S. oath and became a citizen on that day, they actually renounced Italy. It's only since 1992 that even though somebody could become a U.S. citizen, if they're from Italy, they don't actually give up their Italian citizenship. So since 1992, everyone that became a U.S. citizen is actually a dual citizen. So that's the way, most of the people probably on this call had a parent or grandparent or a great-grandparent who naturalized and became a U.S. citizen well before 1992, of course. So there's another unique rule here that has to do with the difference between men and women lineages. So this is the second rule to think of. And that is, if you are staying on your paternal side with just men in your family, then there are no particularly restrictions here other than what I just said, which is, the person that came from Italy had to still be an Italian citizen when that next male was born. But if you're going to use your mother or your grandmother, and it's very difficult to use a great-grandmother, but if there's a female in your lineage that you're going to use, then for that first female, the oldest female in your lineage that you're using, if the next child in your lineage has to be born after January 1, 1948. So that might affect a lot of you here. It's a very interesting odd rule, but when Italy was kind of reformulated, you could call it after World War II, and the Republic created a new constitution. New laws went into effect, and there was a lot of excitement January 1, 1948 with the new Republic of Italy, because they were giving lots of rights to women. I'm sure they were celebrating in 1948, and they said, we're going to make this equal and have and allow women to pass on citizenship to their children. Never before could they do that. We're going to allow that to happen, but we're only going to allow it for their children born after this date of the new Constitution, 1/1/1948. So, of course, there's a lot of you that might very well.
The menu, the dress, and the food. The bride with the most.
So anyway, it's a difficult rule, but you can file a lawsuit in Italy to challenge the constitutionality of this 1948 rule, claiming that it is discriminatory against women because the men don't have that 1948 restriction, and you almost always will win that case. And with that court order stating that this is an unconstitutional law, then you can apply at the consulate, for instance, here in the U.S. After you get that court order victory, you now can use all the same rules, but you eliminate the 1948 rule. It doesn't apply. So that's good. Now, let's go to the next slide, because that probably was going to prompt many questions in a few minutes. Here's a summary of what we just said as an example. So there's some examples given here. So you'll be able to see this in print, and you'll see about the January 1, 1948 rule. But the main situation that occurs for all of us here, if you qualify, is that using the male lineage, you either qualify or you don't. But if you have a female in your line, you may be able to sue the government to eliminate January 1. But there's no such thing on the male side.
Cathedral veil, which is definitely OPR.
One extra rule that's involved that could affect some of you. If you are going back to great-grandparents, for instance, and they came over at the turn of the century, if they became a U.S. citizen prior to mid-year 1912, and this is really important, you basically throw out what you're seeing on the page here. It doesn't have anything. You're not going to be qualified if that immigrant in your family, that great-grandfather, for instance, became a citizen prior to 1912, then I always call it all bets are off. It's one of these, another set of laws in Italy that just basically, the effect of it is, if anybody left Italy and became a citizen of another country prior to 1912, it's like Italy disowned them. They said, no longer do we give any rights to that family. They've chosen to leave Italy, and that's the way to look at this. So there are cases where you might have a grandfather, great-grandfather, a great-great-grandfather become a citizen after the birth of the next child, but it was before 1912, and so you don't qualify. So that's a restrictive that doesn't fit a lot of people because it's going back pretty far, but does affect some. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's talk about what it means to apply. So first, think about this. If you qualify, given these rules, then we could make a statement here to say you actually are a dual citizen right now, but the government doesn't know who you are. It's like you're a citizen without papers, or an undocumented citizen. So what your objective is in going to is to register all the vital records: birth, marriage, divorces, and deaths. So 4 sets of vital records for your ancestral lineage people, from that immigrant that came over all the way to you. And you're actually registering because none of these things were registered in Italy. So you're going in a systematic fashion to put in front of them certified copies of the birth, marriage, divorces if they occurred, remarriages if they occurred, and then deaths of your ancestors in your lineage, to prove that you're connected to that ancestor. And that's what the objective is. You're going in a bureaucratic meeting, an administrative meeting is a better way to say it, and you're showing these papers, including that proof of naturalization, to show the date of naturalization being after the date of the birth of that next child. So you get certified papers of the naturalization papers as well. Many of you may have said, well, my great-grandparent or grandparent never became a U.S. citizen. They lived and died here as an Italian. That's just as good then, because that means the children were born of an Italian. And there are special letters of non-existence, they're called, and other documents you have to gather, but it's very doable to get papers that will either show when the naturalization date took place or proof from the federal government that your ancestor never became a U.S. citizen. That's just as good. Let's talk about one more thing. On all these birth, marriage, divorce, and death records, it's really 3 pieces of paper. You have to get brand new certified copies from the state or the county or the city where these events took place here in the U.S. or other countries. You have to have them apostilled, and you have to have that birth, marriage, or death record translated to Italian. So each record is really 3 pieces of paper. It's a nice way to look at it. If you're unfamiliar with these words, you have to get the certified long-form versions from, say, your state, and then Secretary of State. All 50 states have a Secretary of State that has an apostille office, and they will attach a paper verifying that this is a legitimate, birth record from New Jersey or birth record from New York, whatever state it is. It's a little bit of a double certification. You get it certified from the state, and then you get it apostilled from the state as well, and you then get the document itself translated. So that's part of the effort, because the consulate keeps all of these docs. You don't get them back, so you have to have new ones that are eligible for apostille, and then you turn that into your permanent file. Let me give you one other side example here. For instance, 2 things. One, let's talk about minor children. On the day you walk into the consulate for your appointment, that's the date that counts for you starting your citizenship paperwork. And so if all your children that are 17 and under on that date that you walk in are eligible for citizenship under your application, they don't pay any fees. It's just their birth record apostilled and translated. Done. Beautiful. They're automatically citizens with you. If you have children that have turned 18 already or older, then they're adult applicants, and they would pay the €300 fee and do everything you're doing. Now let's talk about spouses. Your spouse is eligible for citizenship the day you get your citizenship letter from Italy. So you go through this process of getting these documents. You have your meeting at the consulate. It'll be several months usually before you get your citizenship letter. And on that day that they announce that you're a citizen, that's the first day your spouse can apply. And it's an entirely different process. It starts out online, and there's actually a criminal background check done on your spouse. And that's really the difference. It's not the same kind of lineage thing, because they're tied to you as the spouse. They're not about the Italian situation. So there's some small things here. If you just got married, you got to wait a little bit, because being overseas from Italy, you have to be married for 3 years. And then, that would be a restriction. If you got your citizenship before your marriage was 3 years old, then you'd have to wait a little bit longer until you were married 3 years, and then your spouse could apply. Okay. All right, I'm looking at some other questions now that are coming through. Let's see. Probably we just do this by answering each question, I guess. So,
well, why don't we actually move to the next slide? Okay, pleasure.
Yeah. All right. So let's see.
We received so many questions, and so that's why it's very difficult to answer to each one because it would take more than, I think, a day and a half. So we try to talk about eligibility.
Yeah, we're trying to cover sort of generally all the eligibility, but I'm looking at some of the questions that all of you have just written in. Let me give you an idea here on a couple things. This will answer several questions. The consulates are not allowed to share your portfolio of docs. It becomes like a permanent file. So if you and your parent, maybe your children, maybe your brother or sister, maybe there's several family members here that all qualify, you'd like to be able to use one set of your historic docs here, file one set and have all of you apply using one set. That only works if you're all living in the same jurisdiction of, that one consulate. Or say if you're the point person here in the family doing it, well then everybody that lives in the jurisdiction of your consulate, then they can tap into your file, and they really only have to bring in their birth record and their own nuclear family, spouses and their kids, whatever they have. That would be their addition. But unfortunately, if it's, let's use this example, let's say it's you and one of your siblings, and your sibling lives in Los Angeles and you live in New York. Well, you're going to go to two different consulates, and it means that both of you, although the lineages are identical, you will have to get a complete set of documents, identically done the same way, because they're not allowed to share these things. If you have, if you have an adult child, they only have to add their birth record if they're applying at the same consulate that you are.
There's one thing that I think you should actually mention here. Hold on. Can you go up with this? I can't.
Sure.
Here we go. Sonia Aliotto, who is a lawyer and a very good friend, made a legal correction to the 1948 rule, and I think we should actually look at it unless everybody can see it. The female lineage citizenship is prevented by the law of 1912 and prior laws up to 1948. So what one must challenge in the court in Italy is the rule of 1912 because it is unconstitutional, and not that of 1948, which is the Constitution, obviously. Yes.
Yes, thanks, Sonia. That's absolutely the specifics about it. I guess I was more or less just talking generically because the cutoff is at 1/1/1948, but the reason for that existence is they honored that 1912 law. Even in 1948.
Unfortunately, we call it a 1948 rule, but it's not. So here, Donna sent in a question. Hi, Jim. You indicated that adult children can go on my records, adding their birth records at their appointment, but paying the fees. That's correct.
That's right. So we covered that. So the 300 euros, which you pay in dollars, is payable by every adult applicant, no matter where it is. So there's a couple of things here. There's some questions around documents themselves. We've only really talked about U.S. documents, but you would have to get the Italian birth records from the town of origin. Probably everyone knows this on it, but let's count it as 9,000 towns in Italy, and they are all kept locally. There is not really a legal place to go to get a birth record. So you actually order it from the town hall, and they will give you the certified Italian birth, the Italian marriage. If some of your ancestors in your lineage went back to Italy and died there, then you would be getting their death records as well. So those are required. They don't have to be apostille, and they don't have to be translated. They come certified as is from the town. So that's
there is somebody who actually mentioned that unfortunately they do not qualify whatsoever because of either the female line doesn't work or the paternal line. They naturalized before. So perhaps you can mention that there's a way you can still apply.
Okay, so let's go through some one-offs here, I'll call it, on different ways to apply. Here's one. Let's say for those of you that have parents who were born in Italy, but they came here to the U.S., and let's say they became citizens before you were born, so you lose out. However, you can go back to Italy, and because you have, and here's the general rule, if you had either parent or either grandparent, actually, born in Italy, you can kind of avoid these approaches that we're talking about today and go live, establish permanent residency in Italy, and it's basically 3 years that you have to live there. It gets pretty technical here. You have to get a place to live and show proof that you're living there permanently. In most cases, you're going to have to show that you're earning money too and pay taxes in Italy, for instance. And even then, in some cases, after the 3 years, there may be 2 more years of tax returns before they may give you the citizenship. But at least it's a path forward. If you don't qualify under this normal blood lineage with all these rules, you could go to Italy and do that.
Which perhaps you should introduce the fast track for people who don't want to wait for a consulate appointment.
Yeah, let's talk about 2 things. One, we'll cover if you want to regain citizenship. If any of you were Italian citizens, but then you came here and became U.S. citizens, then you can actually go back to Italy and basically live there for 1 year, and you can regain your citizenship.
Yeah.
By the way, it doesn't close the gap. If children were born between the day you became a citizen, if you had children and now you go back next year and you live for a year and get your citizenship back, it doesn't grandfather back in everybody that was born in between when you were an American citizen. Okay? But at least you can get back your citizen. And the other one you mentioned was
the fast track.
The fast track. So one of the things that's a phenomena, which has got 2 reasons for here in the U.S. One of the phenomena is that it's getting the booking of an appointment with one of the 10 U.S. consulates is getting harder and harder to do, partly because it's being so popular, lots more Italian Americans are applying, so it fills up the dates, but also because they're very, very busy in all the consulates and they have a limited staff and they just don't have enough hours in a week to conduct the meetings. So these things in many of the consulates are taking from 1 year from today if you were to set up an appointment, maybe it's 2. Los Angeles is 5+ years and so on. Each consulate's a little bit different on how far out the next meeting is that's available for you. So we have, everybody calls it the fast track program. We call it that as well. You could put this portfolio, get all your documents just as if you were going to show up at one of the 10 consulates, but instead you move to Italy. And you can apply at one of these towns. You can pick any town you want. You would have to, for instance, show permanent residency by a lease. Most towns want you to show a 12-month lease, but in some cases it could be a 6-month lease. Some people have relatives and they move in permanently with a relative and the relative vouches for them that they're there permanently. So there are different ways to do it, but what it isn't is renting a vacation villa for a month or a hotel for 2 weeks or like faking it, okay? You'll read a lot of things on the internet that talk about getting citizenship in 2 weeks or 1 month or 2 months, but it doesn't really work that way. You can only really apply where you have permanent residency, so it's either in the U.S., probably for all of us on the call here, or if you wanted to move to Italy, you should be ready to commit for about 12 months minimum. And you have to show that you're part of the community, and the general rule of thumb is that you're going to have to be seen in town for 51% of the time during that first year. Now, the fast track about that is that there's no waiting line. You go up on the day you get there and you apply for citizenship at the town hall counter, and they begin the processing, and we often have our clients get citizenships from somewhere between 4 and 8, 4 and 10 months, but it's a lot faster than doing it here in the U.S. when you're having to simply, in fact, wait for the consulate appointments even for quite a bit of time. So the requirement is you've got to establish residency, you're going to have to really move there, and you're probably going to have to stay at least 6 months, if not a year, so that you're there when you get the citizenship.
So beware of those who tell you that you can get citizenship in 2 weeks. That does not.
Yeah, it doesn't really exist. Okay, there's some interesting questions here that are coming through, such as what if, this could be for both Italian or American, what if you can't find various documents, but maybe you find church documents such as a marriage even in a church, but they didn't register the marriage with a town hall, either here or in Italy. Or maybe it's a baptism in a church, for instance, but they, again, never registered the birth. this is very difficult. Let's just say for this conference call here, there's a lot of things you have to do to convince the consulate to accept a church record. So we don't have time to review that, but let's just say it's very difficult to do that. In some cases, you can use church documents to go back to a city, here in the U.S., for instance, and ask that they do a delayed marriage record based on the evidence you show that the people were really married. They just hadn't done it in the town. So there's a variety of legal ways. There's a variety of documents you could put together to make a little bit of a case to the consulate. But the difference will be is if you don't have government city documents for the birth, marriage, divorce, and death, if you don't have them, you're not as guaranteed when you go in. It's just a bit of an uphill battle because of the proof you have to show, and you hope the consulate will see it your way and accept that you don't have a true marriage or birth record. Very difficult.
You can talk also the fact that sometimes the marriage doesn't exist. So there are situations, for instance, where the people were never married, and it has happened before. So a document like the marriage record that's really missing is really a difficult step to overcome, a difficult obstacle to overcome. Each consulate may decide, may ask you to provide additional proof that the person was married, but it's something that it's up to the Italian consulate to decide what to do in the event a document is missing.
Yeah. Okay, I want to answer some more quick questions here about a lot of questions here about specific documents. What do I need? Well, I'll use one example, and everybody listening, if you're thinking about this, what documents do I need? Let me review it one more time, and I'll give just one example. Let's say you're using a grandparent who came from Italy. So your lineage is let's use your grandfather, and then it would be your father, let's say, and then yourself. Well, it's very simple to think about. It's the same thing I mentioned. So your grandfather's birth, his marriage, his death record. Same thing with your father, let's say, birth, marriage, and death. Of course, if he's alive, no death record, obviously. So for yourself, it's your birth. If you were married or are married, your marriage document, and so on. So that's the simplicity of this. Those are the documents you need. There's an option here. A lot of people believe they should take in the birth and death of the spouses who are not really part of this lineage. In other words, in my example, the grandmother, your mother, your spouse. Those are the three spouses that are not really part of this lineage. And right now, most of the consulates are not demanding that you bring in the birth and death of those spouses. We happen to recommend it, especially the first two. If both your grandparents were born in Italy, we think it's a good show of faith to get both Italian birth records, for instance. But it's by really their rules and their procedures, you don't have to bring in the birth and death of each spouse, just of the lineage people.
In case of your spouse, if you're planning as soon as you get citizenship to apply also for her citizenship by marriage, then I would suggest you also include in the application your marriage for sure and her birth certificate as well.
Yeah. I want to add, so Mary Sue asked a question about divorce papers. To give you an idea, why would you have to do that? Well, the real reason, whether it's your grandparents who got divorced, or your parents, or yourself, one of the reasons is that just by the rules, if you were living in Italy, you would have registered all of that at the time it took place. Here you are going into the consulate, and in a 1-hour meeting, you're registering all of this. One of the reasons is, for instance, if a grandparent was married first, but then your grandmother is the second marriage, you're proving through either a divorce or a death record of that first spouse of your grandfather, you're proving that he was eligible to get married to your grandmother. That's really one of the reasons they want to prove that somebody was eligible. So how is this even found out? Well, often death records show the name of a spouse.
Oh, that's nice.
And if that spouse is a different name than you would present it as the grandmother or your mother, for instance, then they're going to say, well, maybe you have the wrong death record or maybe the wrong marriage record. We don't get this. Why is why are there two women involved? You've got a birth record or a marriage record with one mother's name, and now you have the death record of the father with a different wife. So in the meeting, it gets not embarrassing. It just means that they send you home to get the rest of the docs that you missed out.
A divorce?
Divorce maybe, and then if he was remarried, the marriage record. So you just have to fill the gaps. Why not do that ahead of time and come in prepared with all those instead of accidentally having to getting it exposed during the call, which will cost you another 90 days. You just have to mail in the documents usually. It just costs you time. Why not get approved right there at the meeting?
Let me see if we have any other questions here. Without U.S. issues, U.S. born myself and my husband, she was born without issue if possible. Thank you. We're trying to see if there are unique questions that prompt us to say something that we haven't really covered.
Yeah. There's one thing, a couple people, and we've covered it, but let me repeat it one more time. Remember this concept that if your ancestor that came from Italy was still an Italian citizen on the day of the birth of that next child in your lineage, you're fine. So it doesn't matter if they naturalized after the birth or if they never became a citizen. You prove either one. You get the naturalization papers or you get the letters that say they never became a citizen. So the only thing that counts negatively is if you find naturalization papers that are dated earlier than the birth of that next child, then you won't qualify.
There is an additional thing that perhaps we should point out. If your ancestor, your Italy-born ancestor, was never naturalized, then you have to provide several documents. One is the so-called Certificate of Non-Existence, which is issued by the federal government, the USCIS. And the Italian Consulate, along with that letter, will also want you to get certified copies of the censuses. Usually the census that shows that the son of your Italy-born ancestor, perhaps your father or grandfather, was already born, and it will show in the census whether the Italy-born ancestor was still an alien, had already filed his first papers, or was a naturalized citizen. So it could be AL, PA for papers, and NA for naturalized. So that would be an additional proof that your ancestor, Italy-born ancestor, had not naturalized based on what was written in the census.
So let me give a real quick example, and we'll make up a year. Let's say that next child, let's say it's your father, was born in 1923, and his father, your grandfather, was still an Italian citizen. Because he was born in 1923, what you have to produce is the 1930 census. The child will show as 7 years old. But what you're trying to hope for is that it still says alien or those first papers next to the father's name, your grandfather. And that's the interesting thing about the letters of non-existence from the USCIS are not foolproof, and the Italian government knows that, and that's why they need a backup. They want a confirmation to corroborate the research that USCIS does for you, and you corroborate it with this U.S. Census record showing that it says alien. Causes a lot of problem for people if it says NA, because then the Italian Consulate will send you home to go do more research on that naturalization. That's all they do. They just say, your portfolio looks great, but we don't believe your naturalization papers. You got to go find them because the census says the guy wasn't a citizen.
Maybe can you say something about the papers issued by NARA versus USCIS?
Yeah, some of you probably know this. There's many ways to get naturalization papers. Many counties will give you certified papers of naturalization papers from years ago, because the ceremony used to be conducted by local courts, by state courts, county courts. It's only in more recent years that it's begun basically just the federal courts. So there's two ways to do this when they're older naturalizations. First of all, USCIS, in their claim to have the full indexes, you'll get a set of documents, naturalization certificate, and so on. So it's great stuff from USCIS. It does not come certified. Instead, you have to save the manila colored folder, the mailing envelope that it comes in. Believe it or not, this is an agreement between the U.S. State Department and the Italian State Department that this will be accepted proof USCIS naturalization records if you keep the envelope that it came in.
And the cover letter.
And yeah, there's a cover letter as well. On the other hand, most of the consulates will accept the National Archives, and those are certified. They mostly have federal court records, so it's not state level. But if you can find, if you're lucky enough to get the records from the National Archives, they do come certified, and the only little small drawback is it doesn't have a copy of the certificate. It has all the other documents of the petition and the sign of oath and the declaration, so it has all the right papers, but it just doesn't have the certificate. But usually the council will accept the certified NARA copies as well. All right, let's see if there's any final questions, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so.
Let me see that. Hold on, more questions have come in. See, it said to keep the envelope. See,
Yeah,
Donna said, okay,
yeah.
Thank you for adding that. Does anyone know what documents adult children of dual citizens need to provide for their own dual citizenship? Maybe you want to repeat the family files.
Yeah, a couple things real quick if you didn't hear it earlier, and that is your file at the consulate that you're applying to is a file that can be used by other family members using the same lineage if they live in the same footprint, I call it, but it's called the jurisdiction area of that consulate, and it's all, the U.S. is all divided up. Just example, San Francisco has Oregon and Washington and Northern California and so on. There's a set of states. L.A. has Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, and so on. Detroit, as an example, has Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So it's all divided up. You have to look on the websites to see where you live and which one you have to go to. So other family members who then qualify, whether it's your adult children or a sibling or even your parent, if they want to do it. If they live in that same jurisdiction as you, they can just tap into your file there. No reason to get a second set. But if you're going elsewhere in the country for that second person has to go elsewhere, it's a complete set of certified docs. So if one person asks, you look like Mary Sue, you need 3. Yep, they're all going to have to be certified. Apostilled. And of course, really, it's the same translation for all 3. So you only get one translation and just copy it.
Yeah, they tap in by just providing their set of documents. So
well, when they tap in, what Phil's asking is when the person goes there, they say, my brother, father, sister, my aunt, my uncle already came in. Here's their name. Here's the date they came in. This is when they got their citizenship.
And
I'm going to ask.
File.
Yeah, they will then what I call tap into. In other words, they'll open that file and say, fair enough, we have the file. They'll go get it. They'll bring it out on the table or across the window. Some of these consulates have windows that you're talking through. In any case, they will look at it and say, okay, I see what it is here. Now we need your, and then they'll say exactly what you need, and you'll be prepared. You'll have just your birth and your family's direct family situation, for instance, so you don't have to double up. Now, most of them, not most, some of the consulates like Los Angeles ask that if that the person come in with, I'll call them Xerox copies, in other words, photocopies, from your printer, you scanned copies of all those docs. They want a duplicate set, but you just, so if you're organized ahead of time, the family member that's getting all the originals makes copies and gives that to the other family members to go in. LA likes you to do that so they have a file, happens to be copies. Some of the other consulates don't ask for that. They'll just use the same file.
All right, so there was a question here I thought it was interesting. So somebody married an Italian citizen, and so she would like to apply as a...
Yeah, well, we didn't cover that yet. So let me talk quickly about that. Oh, no, we did cover about applying as a spouse. You just have to wait. If your spouse is already an Italian citizen and you've been married for 3 years, then you apply online. There's a whole, each consulate has it with explanations. And to give a quick rundown for those of you interested, the application happens to be online. It's kind of unique. You pay a fee and you upload documents. And here are the documents. If I'm talking to the spouse, so you spouse have to provide your, say, U.S. birth record, apostilled and translated. You're going to supply your Italian marriage. And believe it or not, your U.S. marriage, let's say, will have been registered by your spouse in the town of origin for the family. And so you have to order your registered Italian marriage, even though you're married in the U.S., you're registered in Italy. So that's the second document. And then it's going to be your FBI background report, and then each state police report that you lived in, each state you lived in since you were 14 years old until today. So if you only live in one state, you just need that one state's police report on you, and the FBI report of you. And you get those, you have to have them apostilled and translated and so on. That's the set of docs. Today we had a family that the spouse had lived in 6 different states over the course of their adult life, and so they're getting 6 police reports, plus the FBI, and then the Italian marriage certificate, and their own U.S. birth record.
And remember that all the police reports, including the FBI report, has to be apostilled and translated to Italian.
That's right.
Like all the other documents.
Yeah, and let's see. One of the things that is a problem with meetings, if any of you are trying to get appointments, 8 of the 10 consulates use the online booking system. When you go there, you have to register on the website, and that gives you access to the calendar system. And basically, you're almost going to have to go in every day and attempt to get an appointment because they're booked so solid. The new ones open in most cases every day. Some of the consulates, like Boston, only open up new dates once a month, the first Monday of every month. Other consulates open it up every day, once a day. It's refreshing the system at basically midnight Rome time. So figure your time zone based on 6-hour difference from the East Coast, 9 hours from the West Coast, for instance. And that's the time that new openings will appear on your consulate's website. So you go in every day until you can find it.
I believe that Deborah was also asking how long does it take for when you apply as a spouse. It may take up to 3 years.
Well, let's break that 3 years down. So the day you apply, it probably is going to take you 6 months to get those police reports and the Italian doc and your birth record. Anyway, when you're done, within 6 months, you have to do that because the FBI report's only good for 6 months. Once you've uploaded all these docs, the consulate notifies you. They get a tickler on that, and they contact you and set up an appointment. You and your spouse will go in for a face-to-face meeting, and you'll bring all of these police reports and so on with you, all these documents. They will take it from you. They send it to a department in Rome, and that special department is the one that vets you, and they are so swamped because they're doing spouse applications from all over the world, and it's one department, basically. And so it's basically a 2-year wait from that point.
Just a reminder that they have to also fill out that application online with Italian. So there is an application that has to be filled out with the foreign department, and it's an online only available in Italian application.
Yeah.
So and you will have to provide all those documents, including paying certain fees, and then from that point forward, it's going to be about 2.5, even 3 years with just
sometimes, yeah.
All right.
So it's quite.
Well, after the meeting with the consulate.
This varies. So once let's say you have your meeting and it all goes well, they shake your hand. They say, okay, we're now going to start processing your application, and you'll say, when will I hear from you? When will I get my letter of citizenship? We jumped
from the spousal to the by blood. Yeah.
Based on the Tom's question here. So let me clarify. Let's say you had your meeting for your actual dual citizenship application, not the spouse. And at that meeting, don't leave until you get an answer from them on how far behind they are in processing. We can tell you for the 10 consulates in the U.S., it ranges from about 1 month all the way to 2+ years. There are some consulates that are so far behind that they can't get to processing it for a number of months. So they'll tell you where they are. They'll say, oh, we're 6 months behind. Expect the letter in 6 months, 3 months, 9 months. They should tell you. Not sure about Boston. The question was asked. We're not. It keeps changing. See, if they catch up, then they sometimes spend a week catching up, and then it's a shorter time period, sometimes longer.
How long is the process? Well, that's a good final question. How long is the process, really? I would say about 18 to 24 months, based also on the fact that some consulates may give you an appointment date. Sure. 2020. We are not mentioning Los Angeles because that's the consulate that has appointments as far as 2025. But I would say collecting all the documents. We unfortunately did not really mention in detail the amendments that may be required on some of the U.S. vital records, because all information has to match the information available in the Italian document. Yeah, spellings of last names, dates of birth.
Now, there were some questions that were sent ahead of time that talked about, the last names morphed over the course of time. So the person came into the country with a certain Italian last name, but 50 years later, the family name slightly changed in spelling. And for sure, a lot of the first names were anglicized, so Giuseppe's become Joseph and so on. Many of the consulates accept some of this standard movement from...
It's going to be cut off, I think.
Yeah. And but others don't, so you have to get... you're supposed to get your U.S. vital records amended by the state to reflect the proper names. The consulate likes you to do that.
Well, there are unfortunately so many details because it's a complicated process. I believe we're going to be cut off any second. So we want to thank everyone for participating at this webinar. And Carly is providing all the directions on how to get in contact and how to listen to this webinar. And it was really a pleasure. Thank you so much.